everybody. Good showing today. I was worried. There was only 12 people right at the hour, but we're up to almost 30. That's good. So hope everybody's doing okay. You know the drill, put the questions in the chat. I'll do I don't actually have a lot of news updates, so I kind of figured what I'll do is I have a topic that may take a little bit of time, and then I expect a lot of questions. Specifically, I also want to see if there are going to be questions about boosters, because with a definite increase in the COVID numbers, and I have some reasons for that that I can bring up. If we talked about this last week, but I can repeat some of it. I expect that some of you may have a lot of questions about that. I've tried to get some, again, second time in a row, I tried to get some information, if anybody publishing any statistics, and there's really nothing. There's a total silence out there. Nobody's reporting anything. Meantime, we definitely seeing the wave. There's no question about it. I spoke to a few of my colleagues, and they're seeing a lot of ICU admissions. There's a couple of places in Northwest that's seeing more ICU spikes than at the peak. So whatever the new variant, it seems to be worse than Omicron by a mile. Why that is, nobody understands. It's not even clear as to what exactly we're dealing with, since again, there is no, all the labs, CDC had closed their labs in terms of the kind of mass testing. So they're just doing a small amount of testing. So we can't really get any data. So with that, what I do myself, so I'm traveling right now, right? I'm in Maine, but I'll be back home on Sunday. I was wearing N95, not even KN95 on the flight. And the reason for that is I was told that all the airplanes, most airlines are removing HEPA filters, because the moment the pandemic has ended officially, they're no longer required to do that. And they're very heavy. And so most of companies chose to remove them. And what we've been seeing is sudden spike, particularly in people who have been traveling. And so it makes me believe that basically the prior applications of preventive measures have worked reasonably well. And now that they're not going to be in place regularly, or actually they'll be in place unpredictably, potentially we basically need to take matters in our hands a bit more aggressively. So that's my stance at the moment. Unfortunately, I expect that a lot of the future decision making in the next months is going to be completely unevidenced, simply because we no longer have current statistics. We don't understand what's happening. It's very difficult to apply that to a clinical practice. So a lot of you probably going to be contacting your physicians, asking questions and not getting satisfactory answers, again, because there's simply no statistics in place. All right, so with that, I'll turn to questions, and I'll keep my time so that at around 2:15, maybe just a little less, I'll cover one interesting topic that I think a lot of you would be interested in. All right. A lot of comments about the flowers. That's way better topic than me talking about COVID. If you have a picture of a flower, put it in. I think it's very appropriate for today's Ilana's presentation. So please do. Cases are going up. Yeah, so that's, Benita, that's what I'm saying. And it's not just my observation. I've spoken with about a half a dozen colleagues from consortium across the country by different, I messaged a few people just because I started asking everybody seeing increase in numbers, everybody I asked. So it's not just on East Coast, and actually it feels like East Coast is probably the least of the concerns at the moment. Sounds like the Midwest is the worst. But again, I'm just relaying to you what I've been told by my colleagues. So none of this is based on any statistics, because we can't find any statistics. What can be useful on COVID symptoms? Okay, so that's like an hour response. One way I can answer this, we can potentially do a whole topic on long COVID in terms of how we treat it. I don't think I can answer this easily. So maybe Linda, if you have particular question within this, then I can try to answer it. But I think trying to answer what can be used for long COVID symptoms is massive. And I think you meant LDN, not LPN. And yes, we do use LDN for most of our long COVID patients. LDN stands for low dose naltrexone, which I'm typing this. Oh, naltrax. Huh. I can't spell today. No, I don't know. It's misspelled. Whatever. So that's an anti-inflammatory medication at low dose. At high doses used for opioid reversal. Can we still get either Pfizer or Moderna booster mixing still? I think it's okay. Yeah, the data is seemingly that the Pfizer has slightly less side effects and slightly less effective, the boosters, but you can make a decision. I think the difference is clinically insignificant, statistically definitely insignificant. So you can simply say either one is fine. Okay, what about the wastewater sampling? They're not doing it anymore. All of this has been stopped because of the budgets were all cut. So none of this is done. Again, we're all in the dark. There's no way of identifying this. I'm guessing what probably going to happen is one of two things. Either a media going to start doing something. They're just going to start talking about it again. Or what will happen is nothing's going to happen in the summer because, we don't expect major spike in the summer, but something will happen in the fall when we're truly going to see a major spike. And then this sort of, we'll have to see how the government's going to respond to that. The problem is that I think it's the country and probably the rest of the world is extremely tired of the whole discourse. And so the issue is more about the view and appreciation of the situation rather than the reality. And so my worry is that people are so tired, they simply don't want to hear anything. So the government may sort of just flow with this and say, okay, we're not going to rock the boat and let each state deal with the problem on their own. And how the state's going to deal with this, who knows? We know that in the past, when there's no centralized direction, things tend to be very mismanaged. Okay, so what do I recommend? Assuming we can't get another booster until government says so. So I say exactly, so wear the masks indoors when you have in large groups you don't know. Definitely masking when you're traveling, wherever you are. When you, and it's sort of like, the way you can think of it this way, you're in a large, let's say, let me walk you through a scenario. So let's say you're walking into the airport. So you drove to the airport let's say you drove in the airport on the Uber or Lyft, right? One-on-one in the Uber, in the Lyft. I don't know, you probably are not very important to wear a mask, just one person exposure, unlikely to be a problem. You're walking into airport. First of all, it's a massive structure, very large volumes of open air, almost like as if you're outside. Okay, so how critical is it to wear a mask there? Probably not as much. Now you get closer to the checkpoint, right? And then suddenly there's like this really close folks. That's when I started to put the mask on. So the moment I'm kind of entering into closed space next to crowds of people whom I don't know, I'm masking. Now I go to a small thing like a small yoga studio. I'm probably not going to wear a mask because it's not the same way we used to think about it, but it's kind of an attempt at modifying my life. So, I went today to the hot Pilates. There's no way I'm going to mask myself in hot Pilates. Can you imagine me being only the person masking there and like just totally drenched in sweat and the mask on the face? Like, can you imagine that scenario? That's not only not going to look stupid to everybody else. Like, I can deal with that. But I'm not going to be able to even catch the breath, and then the mask, and then it's going to be a waterboarding, right? So like, it's just certain scenarios, either you do it or you don't. But the plane got me really concerned, especially like JetBlue was completely packed, like to the brim. Every seat was taken. So I don't know. Kim, is that answering to some? I don't know. I don't think I can fully answer your great question. Okay, should you get a booster if you already had 2? Can you specify this? When was your last one? Christy? And you can type it or unmute it.
I think I want to say in January, February timeframe. I don't remember. I just know it was this year.
So you're like way less than 10 months. You're actually not like 6 months or even less. I probably would wait a bit. I would wait a bit, except for one scenario right now. I would consider getting a booster if you're traveling and you're going to have a complex traveling schematics in the next few months. So let's say you're going to be on 3-4 planes and, you know, this and that. It may be worthwhile because you may not be practically able to mask very well. And there could be other scenarios like this. But if you don't have any of this, I probably would wait. Probably wait.
So wait 10 months, you said?
Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Well, so like the 10 months for you will fall somewhere in October, right?
Yes.
So by October, I think it will be very clear if we're going to see any major shifts, because I think if something really major happens, we'll start getting more data and more complex recs by the authorities that will be relying on some data analysis. So.
Okay, thank you.
All right. Okay, so in an AIM track, I definitely would wear a mask. In fact, I'm going to give a lecture next week at Rutgers. So I'm definitely wearing a mask on an AIM track. I will be on it. So, well, you know, Sheila, you're right. I mean, it's not just that. I will be wearing a mask in Amtrak myself for one specific reason. I don't want to get sick, even minor sickness, in the middle of a summer where I have kids are, you know, like you need to make decisions. What is the risk for your personal decision, whether you want to take that risk or you're gonna suffer weird looks and ignore those weird looks, because the weird looks are going to be there no matter whether you're wearing mask or not. So how about you just ignore them? Yeah. Okay, so I think I'm right on time with that. Okay, so if you have more questions, just drop them. I'll see if I'll answer them, because I'll see if I can cover the next topic pretty quickly. So Elisa, who I don't think is here today, she's here. Just want to make sure, kudos to her. So she sent me a very interesting question. She sent me the study that came out. It wasn't a study, it was a public, I think it was just a newsletter article, news media article, saying that there is a study showing that shingles vaccine decreases risk of Alzheimer's disease quite significantly by nearly 30%. And so she just sent me the link, and I realized that this topic has been coming up again and again. And so what I decided to do is not to necessarily just talk about risk of viruses and Alzheimer's disease, but generally like the chronic exposure to viruses on a repetitive basis. So this kind of a general question, we coexist with different viruses. So I'm taking it way beyond just COVID, right? I mean, there are all kinds of viruses. Some of them are very benign. So let's say a common cold, right? Comes and goes. Some of them are seemingly quite benign and sort of like, well, just let's take a herpes type 1, which is the one that tends to live on our lips, cold sores, commonly known. So how benign is this virus? Well, I mean, most people will not have reactivations. They may have it occasionally when they're under the stress and their immune system drops. But, you know, you start looking deeply in the literature, turns out that HSV1 is pretty strongly associated with the increased risk of Alzheimer's disease. And we're not talking about single digits, we're talking about double digits risk. So 20, 30, 40%, depending on your genetic makeup. So patients who have an ApoE4, so this risk of Alzheimer's gene, they may have up to double the risk with chronic repetitive viral infections. So I was going to share the screen with you, but actually I don't think it matters. I'm just going to talk through this because I did this analysis, but what I will do, I will give a link to my YouTube because I recorded the entire 20-minute presentation on this topic. Sorry, 10-minute presentation, because I started realizing that somebody needs to talk about this more, and primarily because there's something we can do about it. So let's go back to this question in terms of vaccines. So what happens if you take a vaccine for a common virus, particularly let's talk about shingles, right? Because those are very frequent condition of reactivation. So yes, there is seemingly a strong data suggestive of decreased risk of Alzheimer's disease, but is it only Alzheimer's disease, or are there other conditions which can be decreased? Turns out the answer is yes. There is other autoimmune states. There's definitely link between chronic viruses and what's called a chronic fatigue syndrome, or CFS. It's more of a mononucleosis or EBV virus, Epstein-Barr virus, that's associated with chronic fatigue. And of course, you know that there is no vaccine against EBV, unfortunately. And now, of course, we're also dealing with long COVID, right? So we're dealing with a COVID infection potentially also causing the chronic fatigue syndrome-like state. And definitions, I think, are, we're calling in long COVID for the EBV, we were calling it CFS, chronic fatigue syndrome. I think all of these things are on the same spectrum. They're simply the way the body responds to the presence of the virus. In a general sense, when everything goes well, the body will conquer the virus, no problem, suppress it, moves it sort of into this dormant state and never deal with this again, because if all checkpoints are correctly met, the virus will just sit there and nothing will happen. But unfortunately, in some percent of population, that's not what's happening. The virus tends to get reactivated multiple times, and that causes a chronic inflammatory response. There is a increasing awareness of this in the field of neurodegenerative diseases, particularly in Alzheimer's disease. If those of you familiar with Bredesen work, there's an increased accent made on what do you do with this. Now, the problem is there's no easy treatment. There's no medication. You can do vaccinations for some things, right? I mean, we can do COVID vaccination, we can do herpes zoster vaccination, but we can't really do shingle. I mean, you can't really do mono vaccinations, and the herpes type 1, there's no vaccine, or type 2, there's no vaccination either. So for some viruses, we have vaccines, for some we don't. But non-vaccination approaches are going to be true for all the viruses. Keep your immune system upregulated, boosted. Make sure that if you have any kind of a exacerbated inflammatory response, that you're working with someone to decrease that response. And then learn direct antiviral treatments. So there are herbs that are directly antiviral, and there are also some very simple things like L-lysine, for example, tends to work reasonably well at high doses between 1 to 3 grams a day for cold sores or for shingles. So those are the easy, simple things to do. Now, the key question is then, if you have this problem, is that a problem, so to speak, right? So let's say you have periodic reactivation of herpes virus or periodic reactivation of shingles. Do you need to truly be worried about it, and what should you be doing about it? So I think that's where the problem gets really sophisticated, because it really depends on your other personal risks. I just mentioned one. If you have ApoE4, I put that in the chat, then you definitely need to get all the chronic viruses addressed. I think there's an overwhelming amount of data suggesting that patients who have an ApoE4 risk tend to respond a lot more pro-inflammatory to any viral infections. And those are the patients who we should target first aggressively, which means you should probably more likely to consider those patients to be vaccinated with whatever the vaccine that can be available for them. And you should engage into the non-pharmacological antiviral treatments. Now, notice that I keep going back to non-pharmacological. The problem is, if you're doing this treatment as a long-term suppressive therapy with medications, even if the medications like valcyclovir or Valtrex is relatively safe, they're only relatively safe. They all have serious side effects. The older classes like acyclovir are basically contraindicated for long-term, just because the side effect profile is unacceptable, in essence, cumulative. So something that you can use for a very short period of time, Paxlovid right now, right, for the COVID, it's not something you would apply for suppressive therapy for years, because the risk will grow, accumulate, and definitely surpass the risk of any benefit. So that's why we drop back to non-pharmacological. But that's also the reason why you're not hearing this conversation being brought up in daylight and discussed aggressively in the regular standard of care, because there is no standard of care to manage this. Nobody will prescribe medications for chronic EBV. There are trials have been done, and there are some centers in the country that advocate for that. But all those physicians are in way minority. Most people will not give any medications for chronic mono. And in a way, I actually agree with that. Part of it is because for chronic mono, we have a pretty effective treatment modalities overall, not just boosting immune system, but also giving some of the direct antivirals and also giving a bit more aggressive things. So for example, intravenous vitamin C for Epstein-Barr, in my opinion, works reasonably well doing it once a week. But there are other modalities, like there's ozone and other hyperbaric oxygen. So certain things will work to decrease the viral load over time. And also you in parallel will be doing an anti-inflammatory treatment. So that link to YouTube, that's the link again to the more detailed analysis of the data. So if you're, the controlled trial junkie like me and want to actually read the data, I put there's a slideshow in there, and I put the actual evidence links and the articles in there so you can review it. I would say specifically if you worried about Alzheimer's and if you're worried about you or someone having ApoE4, definitely watch that video because it's all about that. It's also the reason I also decided to do this as we kind of grow our Alzheimer's program. I start realizing that it's important to compartmentalize different pieces of treatment and give people tools to learn more, because it just could be overwhelming to try to put it all in one box, and you really need to peel the onion, if you will, and sort of talk about each individual risk factor separately. The problem is when EBV doesn't just act in the form of mono, but also manifests as another way to affect exactly. So, right. So that's, and then there's this layer. So there's a layer of the fact that each virus has its own unique complexities. Like, mono is doing this, and then the shingles can do a little bit something else. And then the COVID is yet different. And so not only do we need to understand the general principles, how to manage and how to deal with all this, but we also do need to understand specifics of each virus and what do you do with that. So gets complicated. The link to the video is up top, but I'll repost it. Oh, Janet beat me to this one. Nice. Okay. All right, well, that's all I want to talk about. I want to ask you guys something. I was considering to, or I am still considering to bring up a very controversial topic, and I want to see a raise of hands who's think it's worthwhile. I want to talk about pros and cons of statins, but I want to try to look at this a little differently from how you, because usually when statins are cholesterol lowering medications that are most commonly used, right? So there's this standard camp, which is the cardiology, which is very pro, or primary care and everybody else. And then there's this anti-statin camp. It's like, really, nobody should be taking statin. So I want to try to give a balanced view, and particularly since a lot of our community here is a bit on the older side, I think that's actually who needs to hear this more. I actually feel that people who are younger than 60, 65 shouldn't be all that preoccupied about problems with statins. So really people who are over 75 who should be really carefully thinking about whether they should be taking it. So that's what I want to do. Is that a good topic? Anybody want to, one hand up? I'd love to hear it. Long talk about, okay. So Linda, what we'll do with that, I can ask Ashley at some point to comment and do a little long COVID talk again, which I think it's probably a good idea. We haven't covered that in a while. Janet, I think we can do like a general long COVID update. I think that would be a good one.
Always, but is Linda talking about long COVID or is she just talking about COVID? Linda, please unmute yourself and tell us.
Yeah, that's a good question. Well, I can also,
Yeah, symptoms of long COVID and how to get rid of them.
Yeah, so if it's a general talk, I think it's just going to be not possible because it's going to be very difficult to fit it into 15, 20 minutes.
So it sounds like
well, we can do updates.
A talk on long COVID.
Yeah, we'll do Linda, what we can do sort of like the updates and what we think at the moment are the best treatment methods.
That's good. Thank you.
Great. And the other thing I can do is I can put a video to, if you're interested in a really long conversation. We've done a video about, I'll find it for you when Ilana takes over.
Great, thank you.
Yeah, we've done a video about like an open house on long COVID with John Hopkins and some other folks. So that would be a very good video for you to take a look at. All right, and I'll do statins at some point, either next week or the week after. So, all right, good. I'm doing more. Exactly. So yeah, so I think I'll address that last, and then Ilana will go. So El, I completely agree with you. So to me, what I'm starting to see is that the long COVID is kind of being pushed out as if kind of, well, deal with this somehow. But like we're seeing some of the complexities, like what El is talking about. There's an article that just came out, I think today or yesterday, that says that patients with long COVID, their quality of life is worse than patients with cancer on average. And the whole country is saying, okay, that's like, we don't want to hear it. Like it's everywhere in the news, and yet nobody, like there's no money going into it. There is an attempt to recognize this. Thank God, at least they gave it the diagnostic code, which at least we have that. And so we can bill insurances when we see patients for it. Okay. Ilana, thanks so much for coming back. Always wonderful to have you. Nature is the main healer, the first and the last, right?
That's right. Where everything is come from. We can't have anything without nature. So thanks for having me back, everyone. I always enjoy getting to do a session with this group and seeing so many familiar faces and names, and some folks that are new to me as well. I'm Ilana Rubin. I'm a certified nature therapy and forest bathing guide and the founder of Kindred Nature. And just a quick refresher for anyone who hasn't been in one of the sessions that I've been in before, that nature therapy or forest bathing, I use these terms interchangeably, and it's all about tuning into our senses and connecting with the nature that's in and around each of us that we can find from wherever we are. And this is a practice that you can do from home or outside in a yard, or by connecting with a tree on your street or going to a park. There's so many different options, or going on a big kayaking trip. All these different ways that you can connect, so you don't have to feel like you need to be in a special place. And last time I was here was in January, and so we focused on connecting with some of the nature just within our own homes or buildings, which could have been beans in a jar in the kitchen or something else. And today I'm recognizing that if you're in the Eastern US, you maybe have been dealing with the poor air quality recently that fortunately is lightening up a bit. So I've brought some different bits of nature from outside and inside to share with you. And I also want to just think and explore a little bit about different seasons and cycles that are going on. But although plants can't necessarily, clear up the air on the spot like this, having more plants around actually definitely does help our air quality in the long run too. So I'm going to be sharing, I'll show you about just some of the different bits of plants and the cycles and seasons that they're going through. And while I'm doing this, I welcome anyone who'd like to share in the chat. What are you noticing? Could be about what I'm sharing, or something where you are, or the nature around you. Just share whatever you like in the chat about what are you noticing. So we're now at this time where, if we are in the Northern Hemisphere, maybe it's the late spring or beginning of summer, depending on how you're defining that. But I want to bring our attention to how there's actually so many more seasons and stages that are going on in nature around us. And I find this to be something that can be very supportive if you already do, or if you want to look to nature as a source of support, because maybe you don't feel like blooming and flowering and having a big spring summery season yourself right now, or maybe you do. But if you look around, and I'm just going to talk about some of the different plants, they're actually going through a lot of different stages right now, depending on the individual. So there's not just one time and one way right now. So for example, I've brought in, here's a little seedling from a little garden bed that I've been thinning out. And this is this is like a spicy mustardy crust. And we've got the little roots here. So this is just beginning, even though I'm already a couple months into a potential growing season. And so it's just beginning, which might be where some people are at right now. You might be just starting something, just putting in some new roots, some new little bit of growth. Or maybe you've been uprooted and you get to grow some new little roots while still holding on to what you've already grown and built up here. This is a jade plant that someone gave me a little cutting of, but this can still regrow. This can still become its own whole new healthy being. Maybe it's a good time to be leafing out. Here's a spearmint plant, which is growing many different branches and leaves, and this is just the tip of it, and is also really nice and refreshing to sniff, and I'll be having it in a tea a little bit later. And then got a plant here, or bits of a plant that's got, the nice big flat leaves and also flowering and making seeds. This is from a plantain, which does have quite a number of medicinal uses too. And again, these are just examples about the variety of different stages that are going on and how we don't have just one season. It's not just that winter is about only resting and pulling inwards, or that spring and summer are only about blooming and expanding. There's a lot happening, so you can find what aligns with you. There's a little petal from a tulip poplar tree that's fallen down. So they're done blooming, or they're finishing blooming, and now this is kind of wrinkly. And also ants love it because they have very sugary sap. What else? I have like a whole bunch of things I grabbed, but what's good. This is from a Spanish lavender. And so it's actually already flowered, and this is just the flower head in between flowering and before making ripe seeds. Maybe that's the stage that you're at or want to be at, where you're kind of like you've done something big and you're creating maybe something new, ideas or projects, or maybe it's just a time to rest and like bask in the beauty of what you've made before that next bit. Also nice too. And then the next stage would be, growing that new life. So here's a pea pod, a snow pea that I'm growing, and you can kind of see maybe through the light, little beginnings of seeds, not fully ripe yet. So you might be cradling something that's not ready to be shared with everyone yet, but you're really investing in that. And feel free to share anything about what you are noticing in the chat. These are leaves from daffodils. So, daffodils we see earlier often as these harbingers, signs of spring. And now some of them, their leaves are still green, and many of them, the leaves are looking like this now. They kept photosynthesizing and now they're wilting. The leaves are, but the bulbs, the roots are taking in all this energy and growing a stronger root system. And then next year, they'll bloom again, building from this energy that they've been storing. So maybe even though, we think time of growth, time of blooming, maybe for you, this is actually a time of storing energy, resting more, recharging, really going back into your roots too. And I have a few more examples there, but I just wanted to, give those ideas. So just share anything else. What are you noticing? And then in a moment, we're going to go into the practice that may be familiar to some of you now of really going through a guided practice to tune into our senses. And I see Monica has shared the uprooted jade plant, taking with it what has already grown, resonated with me. Lovely sentiment. Thank you for sharing that, Monica. Yeah, I actually grew a jade plant before, and then at one point I moved and it didn't like the new conditions, but it's really lovely to get to propagate and regrow a new one like this. So, all right, you can continue to share if anyone else would like to. What are you noticing? But otherwise, I will begin to shift us into our first invitation. And as a reminder, for all the invitations, it's up to you how you feel comfortable with engaging. So if I am suggesting that you are paying attention or focusing on a certain sense, and that's not the one that you would like or are able to engage right now, then go ahead and engage whatever feels right for you. So to begin with this invitation of pleasures of presence, just really take a moment to get comfortable, tuning into your body to see what is asking of you, just to be a little bit more maybe gentle or supportive with yourself for this body that is carrying you through all of these life experiences. And taking a few breaths, or if you're in a place or a situation where taking breath is not something you would like to focus on, you could try closing your hands and clenching and then releasing, and doing that in the same rhythm as breathing. So whatever you like, just taking a few breaths or clenching and releasing your hands to bring you into this moment. And noticing where you are in contact with anything around you. I wonder how that feels. If there's anything or anyone giving you and your body some support now, or anything that's helping you feel a little more comfortable. And now, just gazing around wherever you are, noticing any colors or any shapes that you are noticing. Perhaps any visible signs of seasons or cycles. Or maybe a season of something that's persisting, seemingly unchanging. And then whenever you're ready, if it feels comfortable to you, then I welcome you to lower your gaze or close your eyes. And I'm going to just turn off my video for now, so we won't be focused on the screen. So lowering your gaze or closing your eyes. I wonder what it feels like to be you in your body in this moment, in the place where you are right now. And now awakening our imagination. If you were a plant, I wonder what season or cycle or stage you would like to be in now. And what would it feel like? Would you be storing energy into your roots or leafing and branching out? Growing a flower bud, blooming, creating something new, a fruit, or standing there with a beautiful form after the leaves and flowers fall away. Just take a moment to feel into and explore that story of what you would be. And imagining that you're this plant, I wonder what you might feel. Is there anything you might feel similar to what you feel now? Perhaps the air, perhaps soil. What would it feel like if some critter came to visit you? Any textures you might notice. I wonder what vibrations you might sense. If we are still imagining about being a plant that we wouldn't hear quite the way that humans do, but you may sense some vibrations if something's moving near you, or there's a rustling or a breeze. Now beginning to bring our attention back to our human bodies in this present moment and place. Exploring textures that you can feel. Perhaps some that are right with you. Clothing, a chair, the air, or anything else. And tuning into, ask your body if there's anything that it would like, that you can provide to be just a little more comfortable or to get a little bit more enjoyment. Any kind of pleasure of presence, of just being. And I wonder what sounds you might be noticing. If there's any very far away. Any very close to you. Maybe there's a sound that you would like to make just for yourself to hear. You might try listening to the sound of rubbing your hands together or touching something else, listening closely to that sound. Now bringing your attention to your nose. If it's comfortable for you, taking a breath in through your nose and noticing any smells or noticing just any sensations on your face. If you do notice any smells, I wonder if they are different from other days lately, or if it seems the same, or if it all blends together. And instead, we just feel what the air feels like in this moment. Next, bringing your attention to your mouth. If you like, taking a few breaths through your mouth and noticing what sensations that brings to you. Now bring your attention towards your heart, towards your chest, perhaps feeling your heart beating or feeling your lungs expanding. And just noticing what that's like in this moment. Then in a moment, but not just yet, we'll open our eyes or bring our gaze back up. And when you do, you might imagine, and whatever you see is something painted just for you. So whenever you're ready, begin to open your eyes or refocus and lift your gaze. I wonder what's attracting your attention now. I wonder if there's anything you're noticing differently than before, or perhaps there's stillness and sameness. We will come back as a group for a moment here. And if you like, you're welcome to come on camera or off camera is fine too. And I invite you all to share in the chat, what are you noticing? And as people are adding new noticings to the chat, I will just share what people have added earlier. See that Kim shared. Kim has 3 herbs, parsley, pea shoot, and radish growing in a water garden, but I forget to use them. Thank you for sharing, Kim. And Elizabeth has shared, I love pine cones. One picks them up off the ground and assumes they are static and will stay in that form. But if you bring them home and leave them on an open porch, they will close when the weather turns cold and damp. Then, when you bring them into the warmth of your home, they reopen fully. Thank you, Elizabeth. And Monica, I hear birds chirping. Thank you, Monica. Welcome anyone else who would like to share. What are you noticing? And as we're doing that, if you do have anything, any beverage to drink nearby, I encourage you, now is a great time for that, or after we conclude the session. Today I've prepared this tea, which the color is mostly because I put a little honey in it, but at the bottom, I have some bits of some of the spearmint from a plant outside. So here's the spearmint leaves again. And then I just took little bits of another couple leaves and put that in there. And with the honey, it feels very soothing. So that's something that if you're feeling some throat irritation from the air, having something nice and warm, moist, and soothing like that could help, you know, just in the moment, not for a long-term serious situation. And also I see in the chat, and I'm hearing wind chimes, which reminds me how mild and pleasant the air is today, especially after yesterday's upsetting air. And Stella, I hear the wind blowing through my aspen trees. Thank you, Anne, and thank you, Stella. And I saw that earlier someone sent me a message asking my thoughts about recent air quality issues based on wildfires. And they ask if I think the wildfires will be a future trend that will affect air quality issues ongoing. Well, I cannot make a definite prediction about that, but I do know that there's more extreme weather with the climate changing, and the patterns that we're used to are not necessarily going to be as they were before. And so I think that the air quality in the DC, Maryland, Virginia region and the eastern US is clearing up in the immediate future, but who knows what will happen after that. We are actually regionally in a drought right now. So it's really interesting to see what plants and critters are persisting and how they're adapting to that situation. So with that, again, I really encourage everyone just to take some time to tune into the different beings that are around you and seeing if there's any that might give you ideas or support or confidence for whatever situation you might be going through, whether it's something that feels wonderful or very challenging or just flat. And just a reminder that with my practice of Kindred Nature, that I offer much longer sessions. They can be online or they can be in person, and I can do that privately or with public groups. Thank you, Jeanette, for adding that link there. And if you go to that link, you will see that actually next Saturday morning, I am doing a session that is longer. So you would actually get to go through an example of a full forest bathing remotely guided session that would be more than what we've been doing here. And that's free to participants. and it's through the Mississippi River Network. It's actually open to anyone who would like to join. So I encourage you to check that out, and you'll find the link there. And with that, I think I'll hand it back to Jeanette, and really appreciate everyone for joining me for the session again today.
Thank you, Ilana, for this wonderful journey. I actually suggest, if possible, can we put the link to the sign out, not just to your website, so people can find it easier?
Sure. Yep. We'll do that. Grabbing that.
So definitely air pollution is going to be a future topic. I have an idea who I'm going to ask to come to talk to us, but I'm going to keep it a secret for now because I haven't asked that person yet. So I don't know if the person's coming. But we'll definitely have to talk about that. So next week, so I'm presuming I'm doing the wellness talk again, right, Janet? And then Cynthia is doing the mindfulness. Those who are interested, we have decided to hold off of doing MBSR class this summer, simply because it's just too many interruptions and people traveling. So we're going to resume in the fall. With that, the wind will blow over the mess, and it's supposed to be okay for the weekend. So do enjoy great outdoors, and we'll see you all next Friday. Bye.
Thank you.